Human sacrifice, Mesoamerican warfare, royal monopolies, industrial espionage, and child labor. None of these ingredients are listed on the back of your favorite chocolate bar. But they probably should be. Today, chocolate is a $120 billion global industry. Over 7 million metric tons of it are consumed across the planet every single year. We give it on Valentine's Day and treat ourselves after a long day. But for over 90% of its history, chocolate was not sweet. It was not solid, and it certainly was not a treat for children. It was a bitter, spicy, cold drink, whipped into a thick froth and mixed with chili peppers and cornmeal. It was a divine elixir reserved for emperors, priests, and elite warriors. It was so precious that ancient civilizations used it as money. You could literally buy a slave, a turkey, or a night of pleasure with a handful of cocoa beans. So how did a bitter seed hidden inside an alien-looking pod in the Mesoamerican rainforest turn into the sweetest obsession on Earth? Our story starts around 1900 BC in present-day southern Mexico. A mysterious civilization known as the Olmecs lived in these forests. The Olmecs were the first to harvest the Theobroma cacao tree, a plant whose botanical name translates to food of the gods. If you cut open a wild cacao pod, you find a sticky white pulp surrounding bitter seeds. The Olmecs discovered something revolutionary. If you fermented those seeds, dried them in the sun, roasted them over an open fire, and ground them into a paste, the harsh bitterness transformed into a rich, complex aroma. When the Olmec civilization collapsed, the Maya inherited their cacao knowledge and elevated it to a sacred cult. To the Maya, cacao was a gift from the gods, given to humanity by the feathered serpent deity, Kukulkan. Maya texts depict complex chocolate rituals. But the Maya drank their chocolate cold. They ground the roasted beans on a stone slab called a medite, mixed the paste with water, chili peppers, and wild honey, and poured the liquid back and forth between high vessels to form a thick foam. To the Maya, the foam was the soul of the drink. By the 15th century, the mighty Aztec Empire dominated Central America. But the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, was too high and cold for cacao trees to grow. Cacao became the ultimate luxury import. Because they could not grow it, the Aztecs turned cocoa beans into the official currency of their empire. Conquered tribes paid annual tributes in sacks of cacao. Historical records show exact exchange rates. 1 cocoa bean bought a fresh avocado. 3 beans bought a sweet potato. 100 beans purchased a good turkey or a high-quality mantle. And 100 to 500 beans could buy a human slave. Fraudsters even filled empty cocoa bean husks with dirt or wax to scam merchants in the bustling markets of Tenochtitlan. Because beans were literal money, drinking chocolate was an extreme flex of wealth. The Aztec Emperor Montezuma II was reportedly so obsessed with the drink that he consumed up to 50 golden goblets of chocolate every single day. After finishing each cup, the golden chalice was thrown away into the lake, a display of wealth that stunned the European invaders who were about to destroy his empire. In 1519, Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés landed on the shores of Mexico. He came looking for gold. What he found was a bitter brown bean that would reshape the global economy forever. When Hernán Cortés and his conquistadors marched into Tenochtitlan, they were blinded by greed for gold. But when they breached the royal treasury of Montezuma, they found warehouse after warehouse packed with millions of dried cocoa beans. To the Spaniards, it was baffling. The most powerful ruler in the New World was hoarding mountains of what looked like dried sheep droppings. At first, Spanish soldiers despised the drink. Cortés described it as a disgusting beverage for pigs. But Cortés quickly noticed 2 things. First, an Aztec warrior could march for an entire day without fatigue after drinking a single cup. Second, these beans could buy human labor. Cortés wrote directly to King Charles V of Spain, stating that a single cup of this precious drink permits a soldier to walk for a whole day without any other food. In 1528, Cortés loaded a ship with cacao beans, metates, and brewing equipment, and sailed back across the Atlantic. Chocolate had officially arrived in Europe. For the first few years, chocolate sat in Spanish court storage as a bitter medicine prescribed for stomach cramps and fever. But then, Spanish monks in monasteries made a discovery that changed culinary history forever. They threw away the native chili peppers. Instead, they mixed the roasted cacao paste with hot water, massive amounts of cane sugar imported from the Canary Islands, cinnamon, and vanilla. They served it hot. The result was an absolute sensation. For the first time in human history, chocolate became sweet, warm, and rich. The Spanish crown realized they were sitting on a gold mine. They declared a strict royal monopoly on cacao imports from the Americas. And then, they kept chocolate a secret from the rest of Europe for nearly 100 years. Spanish galleons transported cacao in total secrecy. Monks were sworn to silence. Aristocrats drank chocolate behind closed doors in the palaces of Madrid. In 1596, English pirates intercepted a Spanish galleon loaded with thousands of bags of cacao beans. The pirates, assuming the beans were sheep dung, got furious and burned the entire ship and its cargo to the waterline. Millions of dollars worth of chocolate went up in smoke. In 1615, the secret finally leaked. Princess Anne of Austria, daughter of King Philip III of Spain, married King Louis XIII of France. She brought her personal Spanish chocolate makers to the French court in Paris. When the French court tasted the warm, sweet drink, they fell madly in love with it. Drinking chocolate became the ultimate status symbol of European nobility. By the mid-1600s, demand across Europe was skyrocketing. But tropical cacao trees could not grow in cold European climates. To satisfy Europe's addiction, European empires needed land in the tropics. They needed plantations, and above all, they needed labor. To meet Europe's demand, Spain, France, Britain, and Portugal established massive cacao plantations across the Caribbean, Venezuela, and Brazil. Cacao trees are extraordinarily delicate. They require high humidity, shade, and constant labor. European colonizers initially forced indigenous populations into labor, but European diseases like smallpox devastated native communities. European powers turned to the transatlantic slave trade. Between the 1600s and 1800s, hundreds of thousands of enslaved Africans were transported across the Atlantic to labor on cacao estates. Workers labored from dawn until dusk under the equatorial sun, harvesting heavy pods with machetes and drying beans in suffocating heat. Plantation owners calculated that replacing exhausted workers was cheaper than providing humane living conditions. The sweet drink enjoyed by European lords was directly fueled by one of the most horrific labor systems in human history. While plantation workers suffered, chocolate took over the urban centers of Europe. In 1657, the first chocolate house opened in London. It triggered a cultural revolution. Unlike coffee houses, which catered to businessmen for a single penny, chocolate houses were intensely exclusive. Cacao was heavily taxed, making it up to 3 times more expensive than coffee. The most famous establishment was White's Chocolate House, opened in 1692 on St. James's Street. White's became the favorite haunt of aristocrats, politicians, and notorious gamblers. Inside, men wagered fortunes on card games while sipping thick chocolate. Chocolate was considered so valuable that English kings kept personal chocolate makers in their households. King George I built a dedicated chocolate kitchen at Hampton Court Palace, employing a full-time master chocolate maker to prepare a bowl for the king every morning. By the late 1700s, wealthy European homes owned elaborate silver chocolate pots with built-in wooden stirrers called molinillos to keep the fat from separating. Biologically, Europeans were hooked on the chemical combination of caffeine, theobromine, and sugar. Yet chocolate remained a thick, greasy, expensive drink out of reach for 99% of the population. That was about to change. A series of brilliant inventors were about to trigger an industrial revolution that would turn chocolate into a solid bar. At the start of the 19th century, drinking chocolate had a major technical problem: fat. Natural cocoa beans contain about 50% fat, known as cocoa butter. When ground and mixed with water, this fat floats to the top, forming a greasy layer that makes the drink heavy and hard to digest. In 1828, Dutch chemist Casparus van Houten patented a revolutionary invention: the hydraulic cocoa press. Van Houten's machine exerted massive pressure on roasted cacao paste, squeezing out nearly half of the natural cocoa butter. What was left behind was a dry cake that could be pulverized into a fine powder that dissolved easily in milk or water. Van Houten created modern cocoa powder and a massive surplus of pure cocoa butter. In 1847, the British company J.S. Fry & Sons made a discovery that changed food history forever. Joseph Fry realized that if you took that extracted cocoa butter, melted it, and mixed it back into cocoa powder and sugar, it formed a paste that hardened as it cooled. It was the birth of the very first solid-eating chocolate bar in human history. For the first time in 4,000 years, chocolate was something you could hold in your hand and snap into pieces. Fry showcased his invention at the Great Exhibition in London in 1851, and the public went wild. However, those early chocolate bars were dark, dry, and crumbly. The final transformation of chocolate into a silky, melting masterpiece happened in Switzerland. In 1875, Swiss chocolate maker Daniel Peter wanted to create a milk chocolate bar. But whenever he added fresh milk, the water content caused the chocolate to spoil. The breakthrough came from his neighbor in Vevey, Henri Nestlé, who had just invented condensed milk. Daniel Peter mixed Nestlé's concentrated milk powder with cocoa paste and cocoa butter, creating the world's first solid milk chocolate bar. 4 years later, in 1879, another Swiss innovator named Rodolphe Lindt invented a machine called the Conching. The Conching sloshed warm liquid chocolate back and forth for days, rounding off harsh flavors and crushing cocoa particles until they were smoother than the human tongue could detect. Lindt created chocolate that melted instantly on the tongue like velvet. The Swiss had unlocked the formula for modern commercial chocolate. By the turn of the 20th century, chocolate was ready for the masses. In the United States, Milton Hershey built a massive factory in Pennsylvania, creating an industrial empire that mass-produced affordable milk chocolate bars. By 1900, Hershey was churning out millions of chocolate bars every single day. Chocolate was no longer an exclusive luxury. It was a 5-cent impulse buy. During World War I and World War II, governments recognized that chocolate was a vital military asset. It packed immense calories, fat, and caffeine into a lightweight package. The United States military commissioned Hershey to create a custom combat bar called the Ration D bar. The military gave Hershey strict requirements. The bar had to weigh 4 ounces, resist tropical heat, contain high-energy calories, and taste, quote, a little better than a boiled potato, so soldiers would not eat their emergency rations for pleasure. Hershey produced over 3 billion Ration D bars for Allied troops during World War II. During the war, Forrest Mars Sr. partnered with Bruce Murray to create small chocolate drops covered in a hard candy shell that prevented melting in a soldier's pocket. They called them M&Ms. M&Ms became a global phenomenon with the slogan, "Melts in your mouth, not in your hand." By the 1950s, Mars, Hershey, Nestle, and Cadbury were household names. But as global consumption exploded, a dark supply crisis emerged. Today, over 60% of the world's cocoa supply comes from 2 West African nations, Ivory Coast and Ghana. European colonial powers brought cacao trees to West Africa in the early 20th century. Today, West African cocoa is grown on more than 2 million small family farms. These farmers are the foundation of a $120 billion industry, yet most live on less than $1.50 a day. Out of a $3 chocolate bar, the farmer who grew the cocoa receives less than 6 cents. This extreme poverty has created a tragic crisis. According to international reports, over 1 million children are engaged in hazardous labor on cocoa farms in Ivory Coast and Ghana. At the same time, climate change and deforestation threaten the fragile cacao tree. Rising temperatures and severe droughts are shrinking suitable land every year. Chocolate's journey is unlike almost anything else on Earth. It started as a wild, bitter seed in the Mesoamerican jungle. The Olmecs processed it, the Maya worshipped it, and the Aztecs used it as currency. Spanish conquerors stole the secret, added sugar, and European aristocrats made it a luxury fueled by plantation slavery. Industrial inventors turned it into a smooth, solid bar, and corporate giants made it a global staple. A 4,000-year-old gift from the rainforest that became the world's most irresistible obsession. The next time you unwrap a chocolate bar, take a moment to listen to the crinkle of the foil. Inside lies the entire history of human ambition, innovation, and desire. If you enjoyed this story, hit the subscribe button for more hidden histories every single week.